being able to provide a voice to families of this is what it really looks like. This is what our true lived experience is, being a member of a community where you're often misunderstood. So much of the struggle of families with food allergies in public school is that invisible feeling of knowing that you carry this stress day in and day out and that your kids are carrying it and nobody really sees. I talked recently to a family here in our district who has a child with a food allergy, and it was around making accommodations in the lunchroom. The person was really struggling with getting the school to understand why the child needed an alternative place to sit for a period of time. And I said, we have to start looking at that the same way we would look at a sprained ankle or any type of injury where there might be an acute need for us to make a temporary accommodation until this chapter of this child's life passes, right? Until they get over this, whatever this anxious chapter is that's happening. We would never question a child whose parent comes to us and says they've sprained their ankle and they can't participate in phys ed for the next few weeks. We have to start looking at how are we reframing it. And because it's something that's so invisible to people, we don't always see it.
Welcome to the Don't Feed the Fear podcast, where we dive into the complex world of food allergy anxiety. I'm your host, Dr. Amanda Whitehouse, food allergy anxiety psychologist and food allergy mom. Whether you're dealing with allergies yourself or supporting someone who is, join us for an empathetic and informative journey toward food allergy calm and confidence.
Today's guest may sound familiar because she joined us first way back in episode 11 of the show. Everybody loved hearing from her, and I'm so excited to welcome her back to the show. Sarah Hornung is a school district administrator local to me, an educator, and a longtime food allergy friend and advocate. But today we're talking primarily about another role that she knows well, being a food allergy and OIT mom. Sarah has guided 3 children through oral immunotherapy, giving her a perspective that very few parents can offer. Each child's journey was very unique, and this conversation you're about to hear is full of gems that Sarah has learned along the way about treatment, parenting, resilience, and expectations. I know that you'll find encouragement and tremendous wisdom in Sarah's story. Sarah, thank you so much for being back on the show. I'm so excited to chat with you again and share more of your story with everybody.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm really excited to be here. And I can't believe how many episodes you've had since my first one.
I can't. So if anybody is listening and wants to check back in as you hear more of Sarah's story, she was on the podcast way back in December of 2024. It was episode 11. So we're going to recap a little of her background here today. In that episode, she was talking more about both her family and managing allergies and then working as an administrator in the school district here locally and some changes that she's made there, which is also absolutely worthwhile. She's now working on her doctorate degree and going to carry that work forward into the educational system. So we'll share a little bit about that too. But the focus of today is that Sarah is OIT mom extraordinaire. I cannot believe what she took on and what she has accomplished with her kids and their allergies. So we're going to talk about that today. So you're laughing at me as I'm calling you that, but it's true. You're amazing.
Oh, I don't know if I would say extraordinaire, but we do have a lot of experience with OIT because we did it with all 3 kids simultaneously. So that's something that is unique. I actually remember our allergist saying every time we would go to an appointment, she would have like an intern or a fellow or someone with her. And she'd always say, this is the family I told you about. And, we kind of became this like very well-known family in the practice because it was unusual. Number one, that all 3 of the kids had allergies, but also that we were doing OIT for 5 different foods at the same time. So we were doing cashew, pistachio, egg, and peanut, or so I guess 4, but there were some that were overlapped for both kids. So right. My daughter had to do egg and peanut at the same time. My oldest did egg, and my middle son did cashew and pistachio. So it was a lot, and it still continues to be a lot of work. But I tell any person who's considering it or thinking about it, it's something that I would do 100 times again if I could. We have no regrets about pursuing it. And I remember a lot of the fear, your podcast name of Don't Feed the Fear. I had a lot of fear going into it. And now I feel like I can't believe I'm on the other side of that fear and kind of being able to share our story and the success that it brought our family.
Yeah, well, I hope we can touch on all of that. You have got to be the best person to ask for tips on how to get through that, because even outside of allergy life, you're just you're so organized and you're so I don't know how you manage all that you do. But before we go too far into that, let's back up for those who aren't familiar or haven't listened. Just give us an idea of where you were at beforehand with all of the kids' allergies and how you got to that decision-making point.
Sure. So when I became an allergy mom, my first child was allergic to egg. It was scary, but manageable. Unfortunately, we had several accidental ingestions with him. And so he had a few really traumatic experiences with hospitalizations related to his allergy. But overall, once we kind of got the hang of what it meant to be a family with food allergies, and I just think that's important to mention because I think sometimes there's a lot of shame wrapped up in accidental ingestion, and there's a lot of shame in feeling like you've had to use an EpiPen. I think I talked about that the first time you interviewed me, just that feeling of being scared to do it for the first time, but recognizing that it's always the right choice. But we had several struggles with him, but really it became manageable for us. And then my second child, we discovered had allergies as well. He was allergic to egg too, but then he outgrew that. But then we discovered truly it was, I think, a week after he was sort of graduated from being allergic to egg and he had outgrown it, that he ate a pistachio for the first time and went into anaphylaxis. And we really had to reset and discovered that he was not actually free from allergies, that he was just allergic to something that we had not given him yet. And then my daughter came along and she was allergic to peanut as well. So she was peanut and egg. And that was when it really started to weigh on me as a busy family. My husband and I both worked full time outside of the home. We had a lot of activities and sports and just a busy young family that it felt like I started to get to this point where I found myself not engaging in social events with family and friends. I started to withdraw a lot because the stress of trying to manage what will they eat at this birthday party and what meal will they have at this family dinner became overwhelming to us, to the point that I really recognized something would have to change either in our family, whether it be a parent staying home or someone being able to really manage all of that, because it did feel like it was getting out of control.
A lot of people don't have, the support that you did. And it was that tough, even with knowing that your family is really supportive.
Yes.
You have friends and neighbors in the community who are so informed and supportive. And it's still that hard.
It still was. We were at a family party with the most supportive friends that we could ever have, who had done everything possible to make sure that our kids felt safe and that they were safe. And my son still wouldn't eat at the party. And that was when I just really had this breaking point as a mom, recognizing this is not a sustainable way for our family to operate. And I also was so tired of talking about it with everybody. It became this identity that we carried, oh, here they come, the family with food allergies, and we better make sure that we're accommodating them. And it just felt like a lot. And I had so much support, but it still was starting to feel like it was overwhelming. I have to give credit to the school nurse. I work in public education, and a school nurse is often the partner for a family who has allergies. And she was the first person who actually introduced OIT to me. So I remember calling her, and she must have detected some of the anxiety in my voice. I must have been calling her just to talk, whether it be EpiPens or prescriptions or something that might have happened. And she said, "Have you ever considered this treatment?" She said, "There are other families in our district who have done this before and see this allergist, and it might be something that you're interested in." And I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. It was nothing that our allergist at the time told me existed, which I think is a disservice to allergy families. At this point, I had 3 kids with allergies. I had no knowledge of it. And so I made the appointment. I went in. And before I did, I had gone to our existing allergist and said, "I'm looking for advice. I think this might be something that our family should consider. This is becoming unmanageable for me from a just safety standpoint. I feel like I can't possibly keep my kids safe in the world." And they kind of laughed at me. They're very dismissive of it. And I will say it's not for everybody. And I recognize that. And I tell people that disclaimer all the time. It's not for everybody. But I was really disappointed that I was kind of made to feel foolish for even considering it, or honestly dangerous. There was a level of, are you really going to put your kids in harm's way? And that was in the back of my mind as I started to pursue it. But I had the appointment with the new allergist, and I will never forget that appointment because I cried. I am a crier. But I walked in and I'm sorry, I might get emotional talking about this. I walked in and I said, I told our story to her, and she said, your kids will be able to eat their allergen 1 year from now. And I remember just this weight of the world is the only way to describe it, like fell off of me. And she said, you're going to be okay. Your kids are going to be okay. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for years, and we're going to get your family in a better place. And she did. And, I think that's in so many ways, like that's the happy ending to our story. And I can share all of the chapters that happened in between. But the moral of it is that she said that to me on the first day and kept that promise. And it was a lot of hard work, but truly, like, my kids are okay. And we can get into this in a little bit, but one of them is completely not allergic anymore. And it's important to medically say, I'm not a physician, I'm not an allergist, but the happy ending for that too is we went into this thinking we just want a level of safety. We want a level of reducing risk in the world, but we came out of it with a level of safety for two of the kids, and also one of them who is completely no longer has an EpiPen, has been blood tested for several years now with no signs of any type of allergy, which is truly the best case scenario.
That's amazing. I just want to give appreciation to those doctors who are early adopters of these programs and know what families need and are putting themselves out there to provide this for us, because it is truly life-changing.
Our family will forever be grateful to her for not only bringing OIT to the Buffalo area, but also for just how much she supported us. It's like, you're there every 2 weeks. You're calling them every night if you need them. And when she left to bring the practice to another region of the country, and she told us, my son cried in the appointment when she told him that she was leaving, because he, at the age of 10 at the time, had this profound gratitude for her, because he recognized not only did she create something that kept him safe and maintained it with us, but she also just always treated him in a way that if he had questions or he had struggles or he had anxiety about it, she had a way with him of just explaining, you're going to be okay. This is what it is. This is what it's not. And our family we've never had a doctor like that in our life. I don't know if we ever will again, because she truly changed everything about our family.
Yeah. It sounds like the decision-making process was somewhat clear. Is that oversimplified the way you described it? Was it more of a consideration, or were you 100% in once you heard about it?
Well, I'll tell you some of the reasons why we were hesitant, or maybe some of our reluctance at the time. A big part of it was I really didn't actually understand how it would work. And that was something that I think was a struggle. I actually remember coming to work and saying to my boss, I think we're going to do this treatment. I might need to take an FMLA leave. Like, I didn't know. I really was just, and now in hindsight, it's embarrassing that I even had that approach, but that was really, I didn't know what I didn't know. I was worried about, what if the kids need me in the middle of the day? What if they have a reaction 14 hours later and they're at school and I have to leave and I have this demanding career? Like, I don't think I can do it all. And so I did think, though that was a consideration, was, can we even handle this? Can we really even fit it into our schedule? I think youth sports has always been a big part of our life. I was worried about that because of the period of time when you have that downtime. I didn't know how that would work. We worried about how little my daughter was in particular, because the idea that you have that quiet time where you're at rest, I think to me that sounded like it was impossible. Like, how can I possibly make her sit still? I was envisioning like all three of them sitting at the dining room table, completely still. Don't move. Nobody move for 2 hours. And in practice, that looked much different, where we got to the point where we were comfortable, like driving places. So it would be, okay, maybe we're going to do OIT, and then we're going to drive to pick up our Instacart order, and we're going to run a couple errands. And again, that was much farther down the road when we really knew what to expect and what it looked like. And then I think the other part of it that I see this a lot is the cost. We weren't sure what the cost would be. For us, it was, I think we paid $500 per food to start. And we were starting with 4 foods And one of them we were doing for 2 kids. I think we paid $2,500 upfront to start the process. And that felt like a lot of money for something that we may not find success with, that we may want to change our mind. So I think that was another reluctance that we had, or a decision that we had to overcome. We have wonderful insurance, so our insurance covered those follow-up appointments every 2 weeks, but that initial decision was a lot. So I think those were really the big aspects of it that we had to pause and decide if it would be something that would work. But my husband and I both have always had the mindset of we'll figure it out. We can always change our mind. And we had a lot of support from our family. So I remember texting my mom and my sisters and saying, like, I might need you to come over if I have a meeting and it's OIT time. Can you be an extra set of hands? Can you be able to be our support system? And they were. So it was also just being honest with people about what we were doing. I remember telling my friends, like, my life is going to look different for the next year or two because my kids are doing OIT. I'm not going to have a social life. So it's just communicating with people about what you need and what it is, and
asking for support. Yeah.
Asking for support. Exactly. And truly with my employer, like I said, said, I might need to take an FMLA leave because I just didn't even know what I would need. But what I really just needed was an understanding of, I'm going to need to go to the doctor every 2 weeks. I'm going to need to leave work. And luckily I have a career where that flexibility is something that I can handle. Just being clear with people about what was really happening in our family.
Thank you for sharing that, because a lot of us do say, like, oh, it's life-changing. Everything looks so different now. But for people to hear that, they're still stuck on I can't even conceptualize what this would look like. How could it be possible? And it does feel that big. It's not embarrassing that you didn't know when you asked that, because I just think people can't even wrap their heads around where would I begin?
Where does it fit into our life? And what are the structures that have to change in our family for that to be even possible?
Yeah. Well, and that's a good question. I mean, you kind of already touched on this, but you did change a lot of the structures and most of it was temporary. Was it worth it? I mean, it's a big investment, not just the money.
Yeah. I think like I said, I would do it 100 times again if I could. We had to have boundaries with people and with ourselves of what can we say yes to in this chapter of life right now. We definitely spent a lot more time at home when we possibly could. We tried to have as little of a social life as we possibly could. And that sounds like it was bad, but it wasn't. It was just saying, let's be really thoughtful and intentional about what we say yes to and how can we protect that time, because if you don't protect the time, you won't be able to do it every day. And especially in those first, for us, it was like 18 months before the kids got to their maintenance phase. But those first 18 months, it was every single day. And so we would have to have weekends where we said, we just can't do that, or we're going to do that at this time, but we've got to go home early to do OIT. And I'm trying to remember, because now it's been a couple of years, but I think Dr. Freeman had said to me, like, feel free to take Christmas Day off. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the only day that we get up, And as time went on, I recognized, like, things happen. I went into it thinking it has to be perfect. We have to be able to do it every single day. And we would go to some of our up doses and not be able to up dose because we weren't as consistent for the last 2 weeks. And we would just be honest and say, we missed a few days. We're just not ready to up dose this week. We had a lot, someone got sick. Someone had an emergency. Life just happened. And once we got into that, like, okay, we have to make this work for us. And a little bit of me was scared that Dr. Freeman would be like, you failed.
You're kicked out.
Yeah, you're kicked out of the program. You didn't do it every day. But she was always super supportive of that and understood that we were a real family who had challenges. So
one thing that I know people will want to ask, and then we'll get into the day-to-day and how it progressed. But you mentioned you're a big hockey family. The kids are very active. I support people and really encourage them even to think, and know families who have said, I'm a soccer kiddo, but for this year, I'm going to sit out from the competitive team in order to make this investment for the future. But you were able to make it work for your family, and all the kids still got to do all their things, right?
They did. We never changed any of our commitments to sports or activities. Again, we had to have sort of these routines and boundaries where the first, I would say 6 to 9 months, we were worried about ever doing the dose before a sport, because even though it's a 2-hour rest period after, I still had this feeling of like, I don't know if he takes his dose at 3 and he has hockey at 6, And hockey is a really physical sport. We're not talking about like baseball or something where there's a lot of like standing around or downtime. It's physical. You're going really hard the whole time. So for those first 6 to 9 months, I would say we only did the dose at night. So it was 7 p.m. was our typical dosing time. I believe that the kind of rule of thumb was like not to do it too close to bedtime, like 8:30 was sort of our cutoff, but 7 p.m. was our regular routine. And the other part of that like misunderstanding that I had about the rest period where I thought everyone had to sit at the table and not move um, is I didn't realize at one point Dr. Freeman had said, as long as they've been awake for an hour, they can go to sleep. And, I would just check on them. So,
And they're resting.
they're resting, right? Like their heart rate's down. Once I really understood some of the science behind it, I started to be more empowered to not feel like it was this overly restrictive world is going to end if I don't do it perfectly. I got to the point where I trusted what was really happening and what would have happened if they had a problem.
Right. And that just takes experience. You just have to, I think, fight through some of those earlier, more anxious nights and get familiar with their bodies and how they respond to the dose and all of those things that you can only live through, not be told and believe, right?
And I think the other thing that you said about, some families, they have to back off on certain things to make OIT a reality. One of our biggest priorities was making sure that our kids didn't feel that OIT was ever a punishment or some type of feeling of like a negative connotation. We tried to keep it so positive. We tried to make it this really, and you actually were the one who taught me like the thanks OIT, like having these moments where we recognize, hey, thanks OIT, because of you, because of your hard work, we get to go to this restaurant tonight, or we get to go to the party, or we get to go to a hockey game and eat the popcorn at the arena and not worry about whether it possibly came in contact with something. But the other part of that was I never wanted them to feel like they couldn't do a sport that they loved or that they couldn't take on this additional commitment. But we would always say to them, if this is too much, we can make a change. OIT is a priority right now for our family. But if you're overwhelmed or if this is too much for you, we're happy to support your decision. But the decision always has to be OIT right now because we've decided that this is the best thing for your health. So it's also just giving them the power of like, if you want to stop playing hockey this winter, you certainly can. But they never did. They kept going and it worked out.
You made it work. And I'm sure you worked very hard to make that happen. I don't want to make it sound like you didn't intentionally do that, but it's doable.
Yeah. We've also, I think, learned the kids respond differently to when mom has them do OIT and dad. So my husband has a lot more success getting the kids to take their dose than I do. I think they just look at me and they're like, oh, I bet we can talk her out of it tonight.
She looks tonight.
Yeah. She doesn't look like she's got the fight in her today. So Patrick is a lot more successful with getting them to do their dose. And so he was a huge part of the success of sports with that because he coaches most of their sports also. So it would be like, all right, come on, you're home from school. Time to take your dose. We've got to go to hockey tonight.
Well, I'll just throw in a lot of families find not just for the kids and how they respond to the parents, but how their parents respond to the kids dosing. And a lot of us moms carry that anxiety in a different way. A lot of families do better when dad can do the dose and maybe isn't so in their head about it or whatever is different about how they experience it. And we all can stay a little more level-headed. So just something for people to consider if they're listening.
Yeah. And sometimes we would have to play like mind games with the kids a little bit over it where I'd be like, I'd be like, I'm going to pretend to give the dose. And then we know she's going to say no. And then I'm going to go to the bathroom and you talk her into it while I'm in the bathroom. And so we would go, we would have these times when we would get desperate and it worked. It'd be like, I would leave the room and my husband would be like, okay, like, I know you don't want to do that, but like, what if mom was really surprised? And then I'd come back out and like, she would have eaten the Reese's Pieces and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so surprised that you're
So good acting and good teamwork.
Yeah, we would have to get creative sometimes because that's the reality of it is everyone gets tired of doing it, both mom and dad and, whoever in your family is helping out with it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that start, like getting over that initial hurdle of, all right, we're committed, we're going to do it. How did that go for your family?
We went really, really slow. The updosing and all of that was as prescribed and as gradual as possible. If he had a hockey tournament, if we skied that day, like we are a family who skis too. So in the winter, it was like after a long day of skiing, if it was great conditions, we'd get home and be like, oh, maybe we should skip OIT tonight. So those were the things that early on we had to learn how to manage. And I think the other thing is like traveling. That was a really big struggle for us early on. We just had to start thinking differently about what we were doing.
Well, you mentioned the snow. That was always my rule. If I can't shovel or snow blow a path to the road for the ambulance to get here, we are not dosing.
We're not doing it.
Nope.
Yep. Yeah. And sometimes those were also like days that the kids really thought were fun. And it became sort of like a special thing of, oh my gosh, we're snowed in. Like, should we skip OIT tonight? And they loved that feeling of like we were in it together.
Mm-hmm. Did they all start on day one together and go to every appointment together, all three up dosing every time? I can't.
They did not all start at the same time, but they all eventually got onto the same up dosing schedule. But my oldest was the one that we sort of felt like, let's have him start, see if we can handle it, see what it's like before we commit to all three kids doing it. And so I want to say he had like a maybe 8 to 12 week head start from the other two. But his start was actually really kind of sad because I messed up when the appointment was for him to begin. And we got all the way to Children's Hospital. And it was also the day of his Halloween parade at school. And I mean, we waited months for the first appointment because it's the type of thing like you might not be able to get in for 6 months or more. So I felt like I couldn't cancel the appointment. I couldn't change it. He was so disappointed. I think he was probably in second grade at the time that he started. And I said, I promise we'll do something really special for Halloween instead because you're missing your Halloween parade. So we get to the Children's Hospital, we check in, and they're like, your appointment is next week. So I mean, and the part of that was so heartbreaking was, number one, he was missing something really fun at school. But number two, we had like coached him up for this big day. We knew this was going to be a scary day. We knew there would be a lot of anxiety. He was the one who really had a ton of anxiety connected to his allergy already. So I just felt like, oh my gosh, this poor kid, I built this up and now we got there and it's the wrong day. And so we had to come back again a week later and start that day instead. But he started, I think it was like 8 to 12 weeks before the others. And then we got onto the same updosing cycle, which was really, really nice. We went every Monday at 2:00. We'd go to school and work in the morning, pick them up early, go to the updose, and then we'd start our 2-week cycle again. So it was part of our routine and just something that we kind of looked forward to. And the nice thing with the updose days was then we didn't have to do OIT that night because they did the updose in the office. And they sometimes were things that they would look forward to, or we would just try to be as grateful for all of the little bonuses that we could.
Yeah. You mentioned anxiety. We talk about how you handle that in your family.
Yeah, absolutely. I have learned so much about managing my anxiety and also theirs. And I think a very wise person once told me, and it's you, Amanda, when thinking about like labels, you can check, you can double check, and anything more than that, you once told me, is anxiety. And I tried to use that same wisdom and apply it across all of our OIT journey of, same thing I was just talking about, like listening to them breathing at night or being worried about symptoms or side effects. And so it's like you can look at things and see them for what they are. You can double check. But once you start getting obsessive about what's happening, that's when that anxiety can easily spiral. Throughout the process, we had to have some times where we leaned back on counseling services. It's something I think should sort of be a required part of doing OIT is you have to be able to address and talk about the fact that the child or adults can do OIT also, that the person is eating the thing that is most dangerous to them. And how do you explain that to them and get them to understand and feel comfortable? And so we would also do a lot of talking with our kids about, but do you feel sick right now? Like after you've taken your dose, when was the last time that you actually felt sick? And we kept a journal, like you had to keep the log every day of whether there were side effects. I would actually show those to my oldest and say, look at the last time you actually even noticed your dose. Isn't that great how science and your body are working together to develop this strength? And so it was also just being really honest with the kids about the process and what was happening. And then the really big thing I think that helped us is what we call like the thanks OIT mindset, where when we would start feeling sorry for ourselves, because that happens, right? Like, whew, we would get to some points where I was like, why are we doing this? And why did this happen to us? And what is all of this for? Is this just so that, we can have a little bit of comfort and freedom because we're really like going to live with this forever? And it was about reframing it and saying, look at all of these great things that our family got to do this month because of OIT. And I think that also the timing of that with the age of our kids was they're starting to go to birthday parties where I don't get invited anymore, or I don't want to go and they don't want me there. But it was starting to be able to say, you can go out to dinner. Like, I'll never forget the first time my parents took my kids out to dinner without me. And even knowing that they felt empowered to do that and felt comfortable for the first time.
Yeah. Well, you touched on it. I think it's nice to recognize those moments of what I can eat now, where I can go now. It's much harder to acknowledge and remember, how did I used to feel when my kid did this thing, or that I could never even imagine letting them do this thing, to the emotional shift and the lightness. One of the things I always think about is like when you have a headache and you take an ibuprofen, you don't notice when your headache goes away. It just goes away.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that emotionally. You don't notice when it just starts getting lighter and gradually decreases.
And I think that's true too with just even, I now am at such a point where my anxiety is under control with it, that I have to also remember, like, this is still an allergy and it still has to be taken seriously. And some of that is also like talking to other people about it. I have to still make sure everybody knows, just because we did this and just because we've had success doesn't mean you can just make whatever you want for birthday cake. Like, it still can't have peanut in it.
Well, I think that's one of the trickiest parts. I did a section on this in the book because it's like that transition. Not only how do we express to other people, it's more complicated almost in some ways. Like, we're still allergic, but this isn't dangerous, but this is, and then explaining that to the kids too. How did you navigate that and making it clear?
So that's been something I think that's really hard for, it was harder for my oldest early on, and now he's getting to the point where he really understands it. So egg is a good example of that, because you get to this point with egg where you can have baked egg but not raw egg or cooked egg. So he's at the point now with OIT where he can have baked egg. He honestly could have cooked egg too. It would probably make him not feel great, but it wouldn't be life-threatening at this point. Mm-hmm. So he will have baked goods, or he'll have tortellini, or some of these things where it's like those were always off limits to us. And now we can have something like that in our house. We don't tell him every time now, because he got to the point where he really didn't care anymore. He understood and trusted that his body would be okay. And a couple of weeks ago, he was eating a dip from Trader Joe's. It was like a dill dip or something like that. And I realized, like, oh, he's eating this. Do I stop him and tell him, like, that has egg in it? It's like you play that weird game where you're trying to figure out where's the line. And we were home. It was a day we were staying home. So he ate he dipped a carrot in it. He ate it. And then I kind of said, like, oh, let me check I wonder if that, I was like, oh, I knew that had egg, but I didn't want to cause alarm. Ew. I didn't want to project anything on him. So I said, let me check if that has egg. I was like, oh, it does. And, and then he was sort of like, oh. I said, did you feel, like, do you feel any different? He's like, no. I said, well, let me know if you do. And then he just quietly, like, moved on with his day. That would have been the type of thing that years ago, even if he would have been safe eating it, would have caused a major, major setback with anxiety, because there would have been, like, trust wrapped up in it, or why was that in the fridge, or how did I stumble upon this and not know? So I think it's his ability to also get to the point where he's like, I know that had egg, but I also know I'm okay. He's finally at that point where he's just like, all right, it is what it is, and moving on with my day.
Right.
My daughter right now really doesn't understand why she can sometimes eat peanut and why it could also really hurt her. She doesn't really understand why she can eat peanut in one instance, but why it's also very dangerous to her. And I even recently drew her a picture of like showing her like small dots getting bigger. And I tried to show her like exactly what the OIT process really is and how right now, you started here, you're about here. If you were not allergic, you'd be up here. So you can never have this much. You can only have this much. I tried to give her a visual for it, but she still didn't really get it. But I think that's also because she started when she was 3. So my boys started when they were old enough to know and remember what life was like avoiding your allergen. This is the only thing she's ever known. It's all she remembers. So for us to say, well, you have peanut every day and you can't have peanut every day, it's just a little bit confusing for her.
I've worked with a lot of families where the teacher will call or the leader of Sunday school will be like, I'm really confused because she told me she eats peanut every day, but the paperwork said. So I think what they say to others too can really get misconstrued if, of course, they don't understand it. It's so confusing.
That actually is exactly what happened to her in kindergarten. Was she was getting to the point where she was able to have baked egg, and she knew it, and she was regularly, but the allergy care plan still said she was allergic to egg. So her teacher wouldn't let her have cupcakes at birthday parties. And so she kept saying to me, Mom, can you please tell her I can have cupcakes? Like it was like, and then I had to explain to her, well, I know you can have cupcakes at home, but just in case you have gym right after, just in case so finally we got to the point where I had to have the allergy plan actually changed because the teachers and the school nurse are going to uphold what the plan says. And they're not comfortable. And I don't want them to be comfortable in the gray area. But I think, and just to like pivot a little bit to what I do for work and supporting what that looks like in schools, I think OIT is one of the reasons why food allergies in schools have become more complicated because there's a bigger spectrum of comfort for people with what it looks like to have an allergy in a school. You've got kids who won't eat in the cafeteria. You've got kids who will sit at the table now. There are kids who will buy lunch because they've done OIT, and so they have a little bit less of, a concern there. So that has caused a lot of struggle, I think, for schools of how do I keep kids safe, and what works for one family might be completely different. It's a very personal plan now because of things like OIT.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, from your insight and your position there, how do we navigate that? How do schools tread through that?
A huge part of it is just being a partner with the family and communicating. It's so much to do with communication. When I started as a teacher, food allergies were not nearly this prevalent, and we didn't have OIT. So it was like, if you were allergic to something, you were allergic, and it was completely off limits, and you sat at the allergy table. And that was really the whole plan. That was that was what it looked like to have a food allergy, either in your classroom or if you were the child with an allergy. And now it really looks like, okay, here's the plan, but we're going to have a conversation with this family about what this looks like in practice. And how are we going to be responsive to the family wanting it to look a little bit different? Even before OIT, I was always of the mindset that I didn't want my kids to sit at the allergy table because I wanted them to be included, but I also wanted them to be able to advocate for themselves. I wanted them to be independent. And, I think it all depends on who your kids are and whether you trust them.
And what their allergen is.
Exactly what they're right. I mean, we were dealing with an egg allergy, not a peanut allergy at that point.
Right.
So I think the likelihood that egg was smeared on their food would be different than the likelihood that peanut butter would have been. So, but even with that, like my kids have experienced bullying because of their allergy. They've experienced unpleasant situations where kids didn't believe them, didn't understand it, didn't want to understand it. So I think that's where schools can really be as supportive of families simply by communicating and keeping that open line of, hey, this is the event that we have coming up, or this is the idea that I have. What does success look like for your family when I'm planning this event? I think that's a really good question that any teacher or administrator or nurse can ask is, what would success look like for your child at this event? And letting families dictate that, because some families are going to say it would look like her getting to pack her own thing because I want her to be as safe as possible. For other families, it might look like having everyone in the class eating the same thing, including the child. Everyone has a different level of comfort. So just having that open door for families to be able to communicate what it looks like is really important.
I love the way you worded that. I wrote it down. That's going to ask it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're already in an administrative position, but you've decided to go back to school and get a doctorate degree to kind of tie this into the work that you already do. Can you tell us just a little bit about that decision and what you're going to be doing?
So yes, I just finished my first semester of my doctoral program, and it's a doctorate in leadership and innovation. And I originally set out to be able to have a greater impact in what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is curriculum and innovation. So that's my title as Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Innovation. It's always been a personal goal of mine to get a doctorate, but I also felt that there was a lot of research out there that I could be doing around some of what NYU calls our problems of practice. So issues that are prevalent in our workplace. One of the reasons that I really love this program in particular is because you're doing a problem of practice where you're selecting something that is a struggle for you in your organization that you want to improve through research. And when I set out to start it, I had an idea of what I wanted that research to be. And this winter, when I was at one of my first classes, I was having a conversation with another person in my class who has an allergy or an intolerance to gluten. And she and I were talking. I said, I have 3 kids with food allergies. I understand. And I started to just tell her all about my passion around advocating for kids with food allergies and how can we make schools more inclusive places. And she said, so is that what your problem of practice will be in this program? And I was like, no, that's not what it is, but it should be.
It is now.
It is now. And so I recognized that is something that I think early on, I was looking for that information. Like I was Googling, how can I communicate with my school nurse on behalf of my kids? How can I make a plan that I even remember creating different documents for my children's teachers of this is what they can have, this is what they can't. I wanted to help with the playbook for families and for schools. So that night I got back to my hotel room. I texted my superintendent. I was like, I feel like this is what my dissertation should be on. I should be interviewing families, not just here in our community, but across the country about what does it look like to create a truly inclusive environment for families and kids with food allergies? And how can I elevate the voices of families who have maybe suffered quietly, for kids who have felt that their medical need and that their unique story has been kind of invisible to many people because it is in many ways an invisible part of us where unless you say it out loud, people don't know what you're suffering from, or also maybe it's not suffering. I think, that I've said this to you many times, like the joy that our family can feel in talking about allergies and identifying that it's something that's been hard, but also manageable, and just being able to elevate those stories and help inform people on what it really looks like and sounds like to be a food allergy kid.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that work. And we will have to have you back again when you get that dissertation under yeah, which will fly by, but I'm sure that's going to be amazing. So thank you for doing that for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot because we didn't prepare this question, but I want to wrap up because I think this is what people will want to know from you. Mom of 3 kids in OIT maintenance.
Yes.
Give us your top practical tips. How do you actually make it work? I mean, you said some already, but if you could pass the wisdom down to people who are about to take it on or in the middle of it, what made it doable?
Oh, gosh. I think the thing that made it doable was when I recognized it didn't have to be perfect. When I kind of acknowledged that if this is going to work, the most sustainable version of it is the one that our family can sustain. And that looked like, hey, we're traveling this weekend. We're just not doing it. And if that means we have to go back a couple doses and build back up, we can do that. Maybe we didn't move as fast as we could have, but we were moving at a pace that worked for our family and that made it a sustainable model for our family. And I think that is probably the number one thing, is just not being scared of it being perfect. But in practice, in reality, whether it took us 12 months, 18 months, 24 months to get to maintenance, it was doing it at a pace that worked for our family. So I think that's probably one thing. And then I think the other is just being really open with your support system, the people that are going to help you, the people that are going to protect you when you need it, right? It was being open with my employer. This is what my family is going through. It's really, really important. It's not going to be forever, but for the next year, I'm going to need some flexibility, right? I'm going to have my phone out in meetings because I'll always have this fear that someone's having a reaction or, just being honest with people. And then for our family and friends, it was saying like, can you come over and hang out with us because we've got to do our dose tonight? And can we host the holiday? Because we would rather do it at home so that at the end of the holiday, we can take our dose on Easter night instead of maybe having to travel back from somewhere. So it's just being honest with people. And people want to help. They really do. And then celebrating the milestones was probably the biggest thing for the kids, was recognizing like, wow, now you can eat at a restaurant. I'll never forget when we got like the all clear for cross-contamination. That was a really big milestone. And just being able to say, what restaurant have we never been able to go to that we can go to now? And just finding those things, or sitting at a Bison's game and being just thrilled that we could have the ice cream and not worry about if the label was accurate or not. It has accomplished something that our family would not have survived without over the last few years. And I think that's the win, is whether we can sustain it for 10 more years or 2 more years. We got through a really challenging part of our family's years where the kids were too little to advocate for themselves. And we were able to put in this layer of safety and support and a voice through the protection in places that may not have been able to protect them.
Yeah, that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. You're amazing. I'm so glad the kids are doing so well.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you for having me on the podcast again.
Of course, another episode to come soon in a couple of years.
with some more progress and updates, I hope.
Absolutely. I hope all good ones. Thank you for listening. And here are 3 action steps that you can consider doing this week to follow up on this episode. Number 1, if you're considering oral immunotherapy, OIT, or if you're already in the middle of it, share this episode with your partner or another support person. I think that real voices of people who have lived these experiences are the most important part of making decisions for ourselves. Number 2, take a moment to reflect on Sarah's brilliant question about what success looks like for your family. That doesn't have to mean for OIT. That can mean for the school year ahead. That can mean for a particular event or activity. Sarah's story is a beautiful reminder that every family's journey through treatment is different, and her perspective as a school administrator reminds us we can play an active and effective part in shaping our experiences. And number 3, if you are navigating allergies, treatment decisions, and you want more practical tools to help you think through the emotional and logistical aspects of immunotherapy, I'd love for you to check out my new workbook, From Fear to Freedom, a workbook for navigating allergy immunotherapy. I wrote it to help families feel informed, supported, and empowered throughout the decision-making process, and I hope that it is helping families out there. If you have read it and you'd be willing to take just a moment to leave an honest review on Amazon, it would go a long way in helping other families find the book too. Thank you so much for listening, for all your support, and I will see you again next week. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any questions about your own medical experience or mental health needs, please consult a professional. I'm Dr. Amanda Whitehouse. Thanks for joining me. And until we chat again, remember, don't feed fear.